This is Paul Jackson interview, take one.
Sorry.
Claude Bailey.
Claude Bailey.
Oh,
Say it again.
That's all right. Just put it in again. Say
Claude Bailey.
lower, lower, lower. All right, right there. Second sticks.
Second Sticks Claude Bailey interview, take one. Mark?
Thank you, Claude, for coming in to do the interview for us. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, give us a little bit about your background. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and I was the first person in my family to actually go to college. And I decided to go to college, ironically. One of the reasons I went to Morehouse was because I had actually met Martin Luther King at a very young age. And obviously, I think I was 14 at the time, and it was obviously had a big impact on my life. I don't think I totally comprehended who he was at the time. It was 1967, and 1 year later, obviously he was shot and killed. But it kind of inspired me, and I became interested in Morehouse because he had gone there. And they actually gave me a full scholarship to come to Morehouse, which was also an added incentive to go there, obviously.
And what was your first year there?
1972. I was a freshman in 1972.
Tell us about what was Morehouse like in 1972?
Morehouse was a very collegial, what word am I looking for? Cohesive kind of place. As I always tell people, it was one of the few places I had ever been where black men were celebrated and taught and, what word am I looking for? Gee whiz. Taught and urged to be great. And I liked that a lot. I went to Morehouse. Of course, being the first person to go to college, everybody said, oh, you should be a doctor. You should be a doctor. And so I didn't know any better, so I was taking pre-med courses my freshman year. And then my second semester, a gentleman came to speak at chapel at Sale Hall, which I don't know if you know about chapel at Sale, but most black schools have a chapel, and then they have these assemblies every week. Well, second semester, my freshman year, Maynard Jackson came to speak. And I must say I was just awestruck because I had never seen anyone like him before.
What was it like to hear him?
It was just inspiring, and he talked about Morehouse. He talked about his plans to run for mayor, and it was just, it just struck a nerve in me, and I said, I really want to know this guy. And over time, when his campaign started, me, Eugene Duffy, and Rodney Strong all kind of became Maynard, what word about it? Maynard, not junk, Maynard groupies, I'll call them.
Maynard acolytes.
Yeah, Maynard acolytes, Maynard groupies, and we just wanted to be around Maynard all the time. And what ended up happening was they came up with the idea of trying to get the AU Center organized for his election. And Rodney Strong, Eugene Duffy, and I, and a lot of other people who all I can't remember now, we got involved with organizing the AU Center to get involved in this campaign. And we went to all 6 schools and tried to organize the students to get involved with his campaign, and obviously to turn out to vote for his election.
So what did you guys do when you got to those schools? What did you tell the students at Spelman and Brown? What did you tell?
We told them this is an opportunity to elect a black man to become the mayor of Atlanta, a major southern city. You'd be letting yourself down and letting down the people who struggle to make the political process available to us if we do not participate in that. I think one of the reasons you come to a black school is for these types of experiences, and this is this experience, and you should support it. And particularly since Maynard went to Morehouse and he was a product of the Atlanta University Center students need to support him, and we got the students organized. I still believe they probably had the highest student turnout rate at that election than any other election in Atlanta's history. I still believe that.
Wow, so that did this.
Right. Right. Thank you.
Still rolling.
So was there any response from students on the negative perspective that said it's not going to happen? Why you guys?
Well, I think most people responded positively. You still, because remember this is the early 70s, and you still had a little bit of the Black Power movement still around. So there were some people who kind of poo-pooed the idea of having a black mayor because they're really not going to change anything. You know, the white man is still in charge and will always be in charge, and just having this figurehead's not going to make any big difference in the lives of black people. I disagreed with that, and I think history proved us right.
So tell us again, what was that Morehouse experience? What is that Morehouse experience for a black man?
Well, the Morehouse experience for a black man is you owe it to yourself and your people to be the best person you can be, but also to serve your people. And I think that is, at least when I was there, that was always emphasized and told to you over and over again. Because, I mean, you look at the people, you look at Julian Bond, you look at Dr. King, you look at Benjamin Mays, you look at Howard Thurman. I mean, these are people who literally, fought and really worked to change our society to make it an equal society for all people.
I like that term you said it was about celebrating black man.
Right, right.
Say it again.
It was about celebrating black manhood. I still say it's probably the only place where black manhood is celebrated.
So that really means something to be a Morehouse man.
Oh, absolutely. Because you know what they say, you can always tell a Morehouse man, but you can't tell him much.
Good line. So after working on Maynard's campaign, what was it like that night when they won?
It was the most incredible. I will never forget it.
Again, you didn't
Okay.
part of my question.
Okay. The night Maynard won was probably one of the most memorable nights. I had never seen a city so happy, so electric. I mean, that whole election day, I mean, all the black radio stations, everybody was about getting the black vote out to make Maynard mayor. And you have to remember, this is in the context of right before the election, former mayor Sam Massell, then Mayor Sam Massell, had this big PR campaign about Atlanta's too young to die, which basically said, if you let this black man, all the things we've worked for are going to go away. And there was a huge backlash in the black community in response to that. And I think it ended up partially being the undoing of Sam Massell, because I think that really motivated black people to come out and vote for Maynard.
So then that night in the room there,
It was unbelievable. It still was probably the only more exciting night was probably the night Barack Obama was elected president.
I've been saying to people, you can almost equate Maynard's election as the first black mayor of a major southern city on par with Barack Obama's election as the first black president.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're very analogous, and there's no question about it.
The election of Maynard.
Right. I think the election of Maynard was very analogous to the election of Barack Obama, because people didn't think it was possible, and it happened. I'm sure people outside of the South certainly didn't think it would happen, and it in fact happened.
Yeah. Some people probably turning in their graves, man.
Oh, no question. I'm sure a lot of those Confederates, all of those people associated with the Confederacy in Georgia weren't, were very surprised. But I can say, if you know Maynard's history, you should not have been surprised by that.
Why not?
Well, you look at Maynard's grandfather, John Wesley Dobbs. He had been a political activist for years and years. You know, he was known as the mayor of Auburn Avenue. And he was always politically involved, but for the political conditions at the time, he probably would have been an elected official in Atlanta. But everybody knew, all the white politicians knew, if you wanted the black vote in Atlanta, you had to go see John Wesley Dobbs. And if you got his endorsement, he could deliver the black vote for you. So political activism wasn't anything new to Maynard. It was kind of in his blood. So that shouldn't surprise anyone that Maynard took the path that he did.
Good. So after Maynard became mayor, did you become a part of his administration?
I worked in the city government. I didn't work in his office directly.
What'd you do?
Back then, there was a thing called the CETA program, which was a federally funded program back during the Carter administration. And they gave cities money, and cities created jobs, and they gave grants to a lot of nonprofits so that people could go to work. And I worked in the CETA program, and I basically went around to all these CETA grantees to be sure that they were doing what they were supposed to do, wrote up reports. And then, of course, I decided that I wanted to go to law school at some point, and then I decided to go to law school. I applied to law schools, and I ended up going to Howard. And this is where Maynard came in again. When I told Maynard I was going to Howard, Maynard called Wiley Branton, then dean of Howard Law School, and said, "This is my guy. Please do everything you can to admit him." And I was admitted, and I came.
Wow. So this is you had gone to Morehouse and was taking pre-med courses.
And changed. But I changed to political science, man. I did change my major to political science.
And then you decided you wanted to be a lawyer, huh?
Yeah, because that's what Maynard was.
And what was it about him being a lawyer that so influenced you to want to go in that direction?
Well, my belief that you could possibly change people's lives by becoming a lawyer, and you could help people, and that's what Maynard was about. Because the thing that always amazed me about Maynard was very empathetic to people. I don't care who you were. I always tell stories about, I remember during the first campaign, we used to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, go down to 5 Points, because that's where all the buses were. And you would see all these elderly black women who were getting on the bus to go to Buckhead in North Atlanta to be domestics. And Maynard could talk to those women and just charm them. And the thing about Maynard is, if you talked to Maynard for 2 minutes, you felt like you knew him after you talked to him. That was a tremendous gift. And I think it was very sincere, because I think Maynard cared about people generally, and black people in particular.
Yeah, he had a great charm about him.
Right, exactly.
Very charismatic.
Right, exactly.
All right. So you worked in the CETA program for how long in the administration?
I worked there for 3 years, and then I left in 1980 to come up here to go to law school.
Now, when you were in Howard in law school, did you stay in touch with Maynard?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
What
I would tell him, I would see him up here from time to time, and I would tell him what I was doing.
Say it again, Claude. When you got to Howard as law school, you
Right. Yeah. After I went to Howard, I stayed in touch with Maynard. I would still go back and forth to Atlanta, and I would see him from time to time. And I would even see him when he would be up here on business. I would see him up here from time to time. So I talked to Maynard. I talked to him regularly. So we stayed in touch. I stayed in touch with him throughout my whole life to the time he passed away. That's just the kind of guy he was.
Right. So were you surprised after he had been mayor for 2 terms in Atlanta, and then Andy Young became mayor, when Maynard decided to go back for a 3rd term? What was your reaction?
I was somewhat surprised. When Maynard decided to run for a 3rd term, I was somewhat surprised, because he had seemed to establish himself, and he had started his securities company, and he seemed to be doing pretty well doing that. You know, one of the things that was telling to me was that after Maynard left office, there wasn't a major white law firm in Atlanta that would hire him as a partner. Here he had been in Atlanta in 8 years, and had taken Atlanta to a whole new place. And no white law firm saw the benefit of hiring Maynard. I find that to be very telling and very disappointing.
Why telling?
Well, I think it says something about where our society was at that particular time. And I think also because Maynard held people's feet to the fire about, for example, including black businesses and everything the city did, and always fighting for black people. And I think that didn't sit well with some of the Atlanta establishment.
It didn't, obviously. You said you stayed in touch.
Right.
So it's that 3rd term. I've interviewed a bunch of people about that 3rd term, and some people felt that the city of Atlanta was a different city when Maynard became mayor for that 3rd term.
Oh, it was a very different city.
You know,
Atlanta was a very different city during his 3rd term, because it had progressed, it had grown, and so many people had moved to Atlanta, so many corporations had moved to Atlanta. I think it was a very different city. It was, in some ways, it was a better city, but it was a different city. Now, I wasn't there, unfortunately, during the 3rd term, so I'm not quite sure of all the details.
well, we had Reagan as president.
Right.
So it was a different country.
It was a different country, that's right.
Reagan was saying he was
Right.
going to make America great again.
Right, exactly.
You know, so it was a different country. And
Right.
there was homelessness, there was AIDS, you
Right.
know, the Rodney King
Right,
riots happened out in L.A.
right. We had the Atlanta child murders.
Yeah, so
Right, right.
that was in the 2nd term.
Was it second? Oh, that was 2nd term, that's right, that's right. I'm sorry, that was 2nd term.
So you left Atlanta in '88, huh?
Yeah, no, 1980.
No. Oh, you left in 1980 and you went to Howard and you stayed here.
I stayed here.
Oh, it was 1980.
And I have a very funny anecdote to tell you about that, because my plan when I went to Howard was to come back to Atlanta. And I got a job at a law firm here, coincidentally, where Vernon Jordan worked. And if you don't know this, you know, Verdon Jordan and Maynard went to Howard High School together. And Vernon kept, I mean, opportunities are better here, you should stay here. And he persuaded me to stay, and I worked at Aiken Governor Strauss, where Vernon was and still is. That was back in the early 80s.
So he told you not to go back to Atlanta?
Yeah, he said, I think, you know, he just said, I think you'd be better off if you stayed here.
So everybody I've spoken to, Claude, I've asked everyone to tell me a Maynard story. Now, you must have a bunch of them. Now, I asked Vernon Jordan the same question. Some people tell me, some people said he would never tell me.
Yeah, right.
So I want you to tell me a story that maybe a little more insightful about Maynard that you feel comfortable talking about.
Well, I think, let me think about this. Well, one of my favorite stories is I remember in 1977 when Maynard first met Valerie. And he had gone to New York, he met her, and this was around the time when he was running for the second term, and he had lost all this weight. And I think she had something to do with that, because I think he really wanted to be attractive to her. And I remember he came back and was just very effusive about Valerie, how he had met this woman and what a wonderful woman she was. And we were having a meeting about something about the campaign. We were sitting in his apartment when he lived in Peachtree, the Peachtree North Apartments, right there at Peachtree and North Avenue. And he was just so effusive. I hadn't really seen that side of him before.
He was a man in love. Huh?
That's right. That's right.
Say that he was a man in love.
Yeah, he was a man. I have to believe he was a man in love.
Right. Any other stories you can tell, anecdotes about Maynard?
No, I mean, to me, but I said, to me, the thing that always impressed me was, for example, we campaigned. We would go to the public housing projects. We would go to bank ed courts. We would go to university homes. And it would just amaze me that when Maynard stepped out the car and walked into those projects, people just ran out to see Maynard. That's what people thought of. Even poor people thought of Maynard, you know, because everybody thought Maynard cared about them. And I think that was true. But that's how people regarded Maynard.
Yeah, he wasn't a phony, obviously.
Right.
He was a real person.
Right.
He had what I call a touch, a common touch.
Right. Despite, you know, some people would say despite his middle class background,
Right.
he still didn't lose touch with common people.
Good. When was the last time you saw Maynard before he passed away?
I ran into Maynard at a restaurant here. It had to be a few months before he passed away. And we talked. And then I remember somebody called me the day that happened and said Maynard had a heart attack at National Airport and that he had passed away. And I was obviously pretty devastated when I heard that.
So what was that conversation like the last time you saw Maynard? What you guys talked about?
He just, you know, asked me what I was doing, and I told him what I was doing, and I was still working in the local government here at the time. In fact, at one point, we were building the convention center here. I worked as general counsel to the convention center authority. We were building a big brand new convention center, and I was trying to get Maynard in the deal, because that's when he was doing the bond work, and I was trying to get him in the deal to get some of the bond work. It didn't quite work out, but I did work very hard to try to get him in the deal, but fortunately it did not work out.
Now, what's interesting about Maynard Jackson, you know, you said you met Dr. King a year before he was assassinated, and Dr. King and those folks in SCLC and SNCC and the NAACP, you know, they spent years knocking to break down the barriers of segregation.
Mm-hmm.
Maynard Jackson becomes, in the early 70s, the first black mayor of a major southern city. Richard Hattrick becomes the mayor in Gary.
Carl Stokes in Cleveland, right.
Coleman Young in
Right.
Detroit, Tom Bradley in LA.
Right.
What was the difference in terms of, how would you define that sort of black empowerment?
I think that was the next step. Well, I think people like Maynard and Coleman Young and Richard Hatcher and Carl Stokes and even Marion Barry, they took it to the next level. They helped, in my view, they helped expand the black middle class, because they wanted to be sure that black people got a piece of the pie from that city government, that blacks had opportunities. I mean, there are a lot of black investment bankers now who got started because they were able to get some of these bond deals. Black lawyers got to do work for cities. that they never got before. Black professionals were hired in cities and hired in fairly senior positions. And I think all of that worked to expand the black middle class. I mean, that's what happened to me being here. I worked in the city government. Marion Barry gave me opportunities to do things I would not have. I worked on the 3 largest projects this city has ever done: the Verizon Center, the basketball arena, the convention center, and the baseball stadium here. I don't think if I had been in any other city, maybe other than Atlanta or someplace like Detroit where there's black political power, I don't think I would have ever had those positions. And I think that's what having that black political power means.
Wow. So for you, that was the next step.
Right. It was the next step.
So what was your reaction to those? I mean, as someone who became part of that black middle class, those who, when you were a young student at in Morehouse, and you're trying to get them to support Maynard, and they're saying the black, this is the time of the Black Panthers.
Right.
Huey had been in jail, Bobby
Right.
Seale,
Right.
Elvis Cleaver, Angela Davis. There was
Right.
there was a segment of the population
Right.
that was angry.
Right.
What was your reaction? Do you think that what happened in terms of what Maynard Jackson was doing, and how that sort of opened up the doors for you and others, is that a direction that made sense for America, looking at America today?
Yes, it made perfect sense. See, I believe you need people on the inside and people on the outside. People on the outside are the ones who push the system. When the system gets pushed, then you get the people on the inside. And if you get good people on the inside, they're about trying to make a change on the inside as well. And I consider Maynard Jackson one of those people who really pushed to make a difference on the inside, tried to make the system work for us.
Great answer, great answer. So what is Maynard Jackson's legacy?
I think
We just asked some of these young people in here if they knew who he was, and they didn't know.
Well, his legacy was that, he was the person who really kind of took Atlanta to the next level. It became, quote unquote, the black Mecca, became known as the place where there was a large black middle class. People migrated to Atlanta from all over the country. Black people migrated from the Midwest, from, the North, because people thought there was opportunity in Atlanta. And I think Maynard was kind of the symbol of that opportunity. And you look at the people he helped. You look at Herman Russell and Jesse Hill and all those people. Maynard made Herman Russell a very, very rich man. And even now, if you look at probably the biggest legacy, if you had to point to one tangible thing, if you look at the airport, the airport's named after him for a reason. The airport is, as you probably know, is the largest economic driver in the city. And Maynard was the one who said, we're going to build a new airport, but black people are going to be a part of this airport. If black people are not part of this airport, we're not going to build it. And like I said, and I think that didn't sit well with certain people in the city of Atlanta.
Right. Yeah. And that's a huge accomplishment.
Right.
A huge.
Oh yeah, because I know people now who have. I have friends who have concession stands in the airport and who participate. I know people, black engineers and people who worked on the airport and helped build the airport. And that, in my mind, all of that is a result of the early efforts of Maynard Jackson.
Great. Good. I think it's good. Wendy, Buzzy, any questions?
I'd love if you came up off of some more of those anecdotes that you guys didn't hold so close to your chest. But all jokes aside, if you can give us some more memories you have of those days where there was this big Maynard movement, and just, give us some more of what you were going through and what you were feeling, and
Right.
Any kind of instances you can remember.
Right. Well, there's a couple of things I didn't talk about. I also think Maynard had the unique ability to attract smart, young, committed black people to work for him. I think about people like Michael and Pearl Lomax. I think about David and Shirley Franklin. I think about a woman named Jan Douglas. I think about a guy named Lovett Stovall, who lives out in southeast Atlanta, who was kind of Maynard's guy. And I met all these people, and they were just very, very interesting people. And and seeing coming from Cleveland, coming from a working class family, seeing a large black middle class that was new to me. And like one of my favorite stories is I remember there was a meeting at David and Shirley's house one time about something, and this is when David was kind of really in his heyday. He was representing all, Roberta Flack and Donny Hathaway and Gladys Knight, and, Richard Pryor. David was the man back then, riding around in his black Rolls Royce that Richard Pryor got for him. And I walked in their house and I saw this art, and I said, "Who is this? Who's this artist?" And they said, "Romare Bearden." I said, "Who?" I had never heard of Romare Bearden. I know who he is now, but those are the kind of small things for me that were important because I got exposed to so much that I would not normally be exposed to. Another of my famous stories is I remember when David produced the movie Grease Lightning and he had the premiere in Atlanta. And I remember going in and I remember going in and I remember seeing Richard Pryor and Pam Grier, and Maynard was in the movie, Julian was in the movie. I mean, that was for a kid like me, that was something I never had any idea that I would ever experience.
Shirley Franklin told us a story about when there was the publicity fight with Muhammad Ali.
Oh yeah, I remember that too. Yeah, that's right, I remember that.
And they had to search for some trunks for Maynard and ask his size.
Right.
He wouldn't tell them his size.
No, I remember that fight. I remember that publicity fight very well. When they were in the ring, yeah, I remember that. I remember that very well.
You remember them trying to fight?
No, that part I wasn't involved in, but I remember that event very well. I remember when David had a big fundraiser for Maynard at the Omni, and he brought in all the people he represented. I remember Gladys Knight performed, Roberta Flack performed, Donny Hathaway performed. And the big thing was, this was at the time that Cicely Tyson was married to Miles Davis. And I remember seeing Cicely Tyson and Miles Davis. And I'm a big jazz guy. And I was just awestruck that here's Miles Davis. I'm sitting at a table with Miles. And I was afraid to say anything to him because, Miles didn't have the best reputation for being nice to people. So I didn't say anything to him, but I was just awestruck here. I'm sitting at the table and there's Miles Davis.
All right. Anything else?
I have.
Go ahead, buddy.
Go ahead. If you could just talk about when you first saw Maynard speaking at Morehouse, just as a young man, like I hear about his stature and his size.
Right.
Like, did that stick out to you? Maybe talk about that. And then I have a second one.
Okay. Well, I mean, Maynard was pretty big back then, and I think that kind of, obviously it wasn't that healthy, but I think that kind of added to his stature, the fact that he was such a large man, and he had that kind of sonorous voice that he had. So I mean, it was like like somebody out of central casting almost, because he was such a large man with such a huge presence.
And then when you were speaking about how he wasn't, no one offered him work after, just as, I guess professionally speaking, what would you say was behind that? He did so much for the community, and then people pretty much turned their back on him.
Well, I don't think black people turned their backs on him. I'm sorry. I don't think black people, when Maynard left, I don't think black people felt like they hadn't turned their back on him. But black people didn't have a job for Maynard. Maynard basically had to go to white people to get a job. And I think, again, because of what he did, I think forcing equality upon some people. They didn't like that, and they weren't necessarily interested in hiring him, because I don't think they believed a black man could bring any added value to their law firm.
But don't you think it was also, they had seen him at work for 8 years,
Yes,
so
right.
it could have been a little bit of payback too.
Right. Yeah, I don't doubt that. Like I said earlier, I don't doubt that there was a certain, among some people, there was some animosity about what Maynard had done, because some people, I'm sure, thought he had taken money out of their pockets and given it to someone else.
Yeah, that's right. Wendy.
You talked about, briefly, you touched on when you heard that Maynard passed refreshing to note that he was a man of politics and, of course, governed Atlanta, but the nation's capital would be the place where he would transition. Tell us about do you remember where you were on that day and what your reaction and how you found out that Maynard had passed?
Yeah, I was actually at work, and someone called me and told me that Maynard had a heart attack and that he had passed away, and that Jim Hudson was making the arrangements to get his body back to Atlanta. And like I said, I was just devastated because in my mind, Maynard's one of those people that was just always going to be around. He's one of those people I just couldn't see the world. Excuse me. I just couldn't see the world without me. I really couldn't. Excuse me.
Did you go to his service?
I cried like a baby. I cried like a baby.
When you went to the service?
When I went to Maynard's funeral, I cried like a baby because I felt like I'd lost almost like a family member, someone who was very important in my life. So, I mean, no, he was probably, outside of my immediate family, one of the most influential and important people in my life. I'll tell anybody. I tell people that all the time. I tell them that all the time.
Important presence for you.
Yes, very important presence for me. And I'll tell a story. I remember he first ran. I remember going to his house for a meeting. I remember when Buzzy and Beth were just little kids back then. I mean, when he lived on Clearbrook off Cascade in Atlanta.
Did he talk about Buzzy and Beth?
Not really, but see, that's the other thing I would say I learned from Maynard. I learned how to be a man. I learned how it's important to be a family man, be involved with your children, and be a good family man. I mean, I'm proud to say I've been married to the same woman for 37 years. And a lot of that has to do with Maynard because Maynard believed in family and the importance of family and taking care of your family.
But when you knew him, did he talk about the children? Did he talk about relationships with the kids?
Not that much. Not with me that much. But it was very clear from his actions that his family was very important to him.
What do we mean, his actions?
Well, I mean, we'd have the kids around him. One time, Buzzy doesn't remember this because he was very young. It was a campaign event, and he took me. There used to be that pancake house down on Piedmont and Ponce de Leon, I think, right around that area, right around Midtown. I remember we went to breakfast, and I remember he brought Buzzy with him, or Maynard the Third, I should say, and and you could tell he wanted to be sure that he spent time with his son.
Okay. Wendy? I think we got it.
All right.
Got one more, Buzzy?
I swear I'll wrap it up with this one.
Yeah, that's all right.
So, I just love how, you say that his influence, like you said you wouldn't be a lawyer, and you wouldn't, be this family man, you've been married for 30 years, 37 years, right, without my dad. So, having said that, how do you think the next generation can bestow that kind of influence on young people coming up? What was it about Maynard what was it about him that allowed him to infuse his influence on people so vastly?
Well, I think as someone who considers myself a Maynard disciple, a Maynard acolyte, however you want to characterize it, I try to live my life by example. I think if you live your life the right way, other people see how you live your life. Hopefully, it will inspire them to lead their lives the same way. And I think that's what Maynard did. He led by example. He lived his life in such a way, because Maynard was always, he was of the highest integrity. There was never any questions about Maynard's integrity. He was a Christian. He believed in God. He believed in Jesus Christ. He was a Christian that was also very obvious. And that's how you live your life. When you see other people, other people see you leading your lives, hopefully they'll want to live their lives that same way as well. So I think Maynard led by example.
That's what you saw.
And that's what I saw, exactly.
Good. Okay.
How was it?
Perfect, man. Great stuff.
All right, so we need 30 seconds of room tone. You have to be quiet.
Just sit back. We're gonna be quiet for a moment. And of course it turns off.
I know, right? Yeah.
We should get it with that running also.
I'll turn it on.
You can manually turn it on?
Yeah.
Okay. This is room tone, camera fan off. Okay, thank you.
Thank
All right,
you.
let me cut for a second. I gotta go to the menu.
We're gonna
okay?
do the slate.
This is just for audio with camera fan on. A little lower.
Can
A
you,
little lower.
somebody switch it from?
No, don't do it now. Just shoot.
Just hold it there.
Yeah.
You can take it
Just
away.
one. Okay. All right.
This is room tone, camera fan on. Okay, good, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claude.
Oh,